Dobar dan svima.
Once again, good day everybody. I'm Sandra Nedeljković. I will have the honor and the pleasure today to the second session. This will tell us how and why we need to plan investments in the future into resilience. Thank you very much, and I see many faces that I know from the country and from the region. Welcome to all of you. I'm very pleased that today we can discuss a topic which in many ways should be topic number one in Serbia, but years. And this disaster found us unready, unprepared. At that time, we did not have in place rules to be governed by in recovery. We did not have an institution who would carry this huge burden and task, and we did not have the money. And that was the first thing that we needed to address. And we needed months to put in operation this whole new mechanism, to adopt the rules and to ensure funding for investments. Floodings left behind them really devastated areas financially and physically. Our budget suffered a serious blow. Instead of growth that year, we had recession. 1.8% of GDP was lost to flooding. Total damage was estimated at almost 5% of our GDP, which in itself says enough to support the scope of the consequences of the flooding. And it became completely clear what kind of omissions or mistakes have been made in the decades preceding the flooding, which contributed to the effects being so serious. We, of course, could not prevent the weather conditions that led to the flooding, but we could have prevented this proportion of the damage. We could have done that by implementing structural and non-structural measures. And this is what we started more seriously and very soon after the flooding to address. Much has been done after the flooding, both in terms of recovery, but also in terms of improving the overall system. Houses were recovered, people again had roofs over their heads, assistance was provided to more than 20,000 families across Serbia whose housing was damaged during the flooding. We had serious, major investments in strengthening the existing preventive infrastructure. We reconstructed more than 100 public facilities. And importantly, we very soon realized that recovery in itself is not and cannot be sufficient. You must add to it a development aspect. Building for someone a house where we had an old one that was destroyed by water is at least not smart. That is why for each such location we did assessment whether there is and to which degree risk of this same or similar damage being repeated. And everywhere where it was determined that there is high flooding risks, families were displaced to another location. In every location where we invested in recovery and building of preventive infrastructure, we attempted, whenever possible, to strengthen the existing infrastructure. Public buildings were constructed to be more resilient to any potential future flooding. And that is why this was not only a reconstruction. I dare say it was a huge development project. And this is not so only when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to buildings and facilities that we invested in, but also when it comes to the system itself. Some months after the flooding, the government of the Republic of Serbia adopted its national plan for managing natural disasters, not just flooding. The new law on reconstruction and recovery was adopted, which now regulates not only dealing with the consequences of flooding, but recovery after natural disasters in general. We've built a system which, through recovery, can be systemically managed, and funding was ensured through an arrangement with the World Bank. A credit line, available and liquid credit line, was provided very soon after the flooding to fund activities either of protection and rescue or reconstruction and recovery afterwards, whereby we prepared for potential future events, so that we would have rules in place, institutions in charge, and money to fund the interventions, and to make all of that reasonable. And this proved to be so in March next year, when again we faced another wave of flooding, not nearly as severe as the first one from 2014. It affected a smaller part of the country, and at that time we realized that what we needed 3 months for in 2014, we could do in 3 weeks in 2016, and the whole emergency response system operated much better, because in the meantime, between the two floodings, in cooperation with our development partners, we drafted the proposed law on managing risks of natural disasters. And in 2016, ad hoc, we implemented these rules from the draft law, which proved to be effective. We used, in fact, a development opportunity that came out of a big misfortune which affected Serbia in 2014. And I think this reflects the need to change our mindset and to change our way of planning, which must happen. Resilience or vitality is a new term and different for us to translate in Serbia. But nevertheless, resilience is not sustainable development, cannot happen, and is not possible to have it or plan it without, at the same time, including in it as a very integrated part of resilience. For years and decades, no matter how much we invested in development, we did sufficiently invest in a difficult way. But I do hope that we've learned our lesson. I'm sure that we did, and all the measures taken since 2014 until the present time confirm this, confirm that we've changed our way of thinking. Things are not perfect, yes, but they are absolutely better. To make things excellent, it takes much time and a lot of money, but you never have time or money as much as needed. And it is certain that every day we are making a step forward, no matter how small it may be, and we are implementing no regrets measures so that we can always look back without regretting not having done something that we should have. Because firstly, flooding is not the only risk that we are exposed to. 30% of the national territory is under risk of landslides. We've seen the damage of hail, of evidence, to which degree a dry season, a drought can cause damages. Droughts are the most expensive risk for us because damages and losses are multiply greater than from flooding, although flooding is more dramatic and happening in a short period of time, and we need to act accordingly. But not only according to risks, which we are aware of, rather our planning needs to have integrated a component of future risks, which result from climate change, and our planning needs to be more complex and include many more sectors, and it is a much more complex task for us, but we have no choice in that respect. No matter how contentious it may be as to what is the cause of climate change, nobody doubts that climate change is happening. It is here, and we therefore need to change our thinking today and our planning of our development for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Blagovic. Now I would like to ask the panelists to join me here. We had the chance to hear Minister and her address. We had the chance to hear the Director of the Public Investment Management Office, and we can say that disaster risk management is an integrated approach, integrated system actually, where it is necessary not to involve just all the levels of governments in a state. So if we talk about Serbia, this is national, provincial and local government, but also we need to have participation from the entire society, academia, private sector, the NGO sector, and also our citizens. The questions of these sessions that our panelists will try to address are the following. What are the capacities that a country needs to be resilient to the effects of natural disasters? Then how to reduce vulnerability to natural and human-induced disasters? What is the role of data in reducing exposure and vulnerabilities to natural and human-induced disasters? What types of data are missing in the Western Balkans region for improving decisions makers' choices in preparedness and response? And what is the proper format of this data? And how innovation and technology can reduce vulnerability and exposure to natural disasters. Our first speaker today is Mr. Ben Slay, who is a senior advisor of the UNDP Istanbul Regional Hub. His expertise is transition economics, international economics, macroeconomic policy, energy and environmental economics, and sustainable development. Long years of experience in working in UNDP and private and public sector, 25 years of experience in the area of economic and political analytics, programs for sustainable development, research and teaching. The floor is yours.
Hvala lepo. With your kind permission, I would like to show some PowerPoint slides and address the meeting from the podium. Hvala puno. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to come here today, participate in this meeting, and focus on issues that are really of critical importance for the entire world. This was made clear, among other things, as has been pointed out, in September 2015, when the government of the Republic of Serbia took disasters that did and does not build resilience against those disasters which cannot be prevented. Such development cannot be sustainable. And this is a major concern not only for the world governments, but also for the United Nations system. So this is what I would like to briefly share with you in terms of the current thinking and initiatives taking place within the framework of the United Nations to respond to the threats of disasters in the sustainable development context. So, is it possible to show the slides, please? Okay, we all know that it's good to prevent disasters. It's better to prevent than respond. But sometimes that's not possible. And when prevention is not fully possible, it's a matter about resilience. Resilience at the national level, at the community level, and at the individual level. But when we talk about resilience, we have to talk about people. And we quickly have to understand that while people may have nothing to do with how much rain falls in 24 hours, or while people may have nothing to do with whether there's an earthquake or not, the consequences, the immediate consequences of the rain falling or the earthquake are all about decisions people make. People at the level of governments, but also people at the level of individuals. This is a concern not only for people as victims of disasters, but people as decision makers who can reduce their consequences and also take steps to make them less likely to occur and reduce their impact. And this is also, of course, a concern for local governments that so often have infrastructure and assets that need to be protected. We now know that to respond to these challenges, it's very much a question of appropriate use of technology and appropriate management of data. Okay. And also, if we're honest, disaster risk reduction and building resilience is also a matter of regional cooperation. The waters that hit Obrenovac in 2014 flowed through many countries before they reached Serbia. The waters of the Tisa, the Danube, the Sava begin in other countries and they flow out of Serbia and reach other countries as well. If one wants to prevent disasters and respond to their consequences and build resilience against their consequences, there is a need for cooperation between countries, be this for early warning, be this for common management of interstate flood infrastructure or other areas as well. We have also learned that vulnerability to natural disasters cannot be separated from vulnerability to broader social economic risks. In the Western Balkans, in Serbia, in Bosnia, and other countries that were so devastated by the floods of 2014, we saw that the people most at risk and for whom resilience needed to be greater were those who generally faced the greatest socioeconomic risk in the society. Who? Like Roma. Roma were more likely than other people to be living in floodplains. The elderly and people living with disability were less likely to be able to get out of the way of the rising waters and needed assistance to do so. Children were more likely to experience long-term development losses in terms of being kept out of school when their schools are damaged by floods or other natural disasters. As Minister Dejanovic said, women. Thank you very much. Women are more likely to be affected by the consequences of natural disasters. They're more likely to leave the labor market, to care for children who are not in school, to care for people who are injured during natural disasters, thereby reducing their human development possibilities. And we also know that low-income families in rural areas are more likely to be at risk from natural disasters. These are people who are more likely to rely on natural resources, ranching, farming, this sort of thing, and are even less likely than others to be insured against disasters when they occur. Fortunately, as has been pointed out, the world is changing, and technologies are making it increasingly possible to respond in real time to disaster risks and reduce the costs of doing so. And not only at the level of national governments, but at the level of communities, and make possible to allow for community solidarity to acquire very real human face and make a difference in people's lives when a disaster occurs. For example, in this slide here, you see an interactive web-based map that was constructed by a radio station in Sarajevo in response to the flooding there in 2014 that allowed for people either through their mobile telephones or other internet devices to report in real time flood-related incidents, be this water coming over the banks of a river, be this infrastructure being wiped out, that made it possible to convey this information to anyone who had access to this website and thereby take some of the burden off the emergency first responders. This underscores how people not only can sometimes be the cause of disasters or make disasters work, they can also be the key to minimizing their impact. They can be the solution. And when we talk about resilience and financing for resilience, ultimately financial flows should reflect this logic as well. Another type of technology and data that is increasingly the wave of the future: spatial analysis for disaster risk reduction, or DRR. This is the map, of course, of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it essentially overlays socioeconomic risk with disaster risk. So on this graph, the colors show the degree of divergence from the national average in terms of income, in terms of per capita income. So the more yellow or the darker the color, the more likely there is to be poverty or social exclusion in a given area. By contrast, the intensity of the dots shows the extent of risk to natural hazards, primarily floods and fires in this case. So this allows policymakers, citizens, anyone who wants to look at a single map and see the extent to which a given area is likely to be affected both by socioeconomic risk and disaster risk, and makes it possible to have not only prevention but resilience strategies designed and implemented in response. We learned many other lessons from the floods of 2014 in the Western Balkans, and this is reflected also in global thinking about disaster risk reduction and sustainable development. One is that development, disaster risk management, planning, policies, and programming needs to be closely integrated with finance. For this, we need whole-of-government approaches so that disaster response is not only the responsibility of the Civil Defense Ministry or the Ministry of Emergency Situations, it's also the response of the Finance Ministry, Ministries of Economy, Education, and ultimately, where we have cross-border risks, Ministries of Finance as well. We need cross-sectoral partnerships so that the government can reach out to and take advantage of energy, ideas, and initiatives coming from the private sector and from civil society. And also critically important, disaster risk reduction on behalf of sustainable development is very much about getting the right mix between national governments and municipalities. And it's so important that we have so many municipalities represented here today. But this also means that municipalities need to budget for disaster risk reduction. And it's not only a question of the income statement, it's a question of the balance sheet. So for example, if a local government, if a municipality has, say, a polyclinic that may have a 10 million euro replacement value and is in a 100-year floodplain, then if every year roughly 100,000 euros are not put into some kind of contingency fund to protect against the likelihood of that 100-year flood, there are questions about there may be questions about the due diligence of the management of the finances and the balance sheet of a municipality. Also, with regards to municipalities and finance, how are contracts with local service providers for the use of municipal assets being managed? Are disaster risks being fully taken into account? What kind of business continuity planning is being done by municipalities to respond to these issues? Global practice increasingly emphasizes the importance of these issues. With that, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention, and look forward to continuing to work with you and other partners here in Serbia and in the Western Balkans to address these issues that are critical to the future of your communities, your regions, and sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slay. Our next speaker is a person that we all think of when disaster strikes. The whole of Serbia expects from him to hear something. Predrag Maric is Assistant Minister and Head of the Sector for Emergency Management with more than 20 years of experience in the field of civil protection. In his various posts, he has been since 2007, and he was decorated with special orders of Serbia and France for his efforts in emergencies. By the decree of the President of Serbia, he was also decorated by a golden medal for his committed service. A very distinguished award of #1 Belgrade was also given to him for his results in work. He teaches at the Criminal Police Academy in Belgrade, teaching the related courses. Mr. Maric, please, you have the floor. Listening to this, you know, it's been a long time. What I want to say at the very outset, apart from welcoming you and for having panels like this organized, because it gives us the opportunity to discuss the system that we have and the changes that we need, I also wish to share with you that we are not alone in this. Seeing the faces around here that I know tells me that we are not alone and that this effort is growing and we should be encouraged by it. And I'm convinced that in the years ahead it will continue to be so. Listening to speakers of today, I will add my own perspective, but I will agree with what has been done here so far. Things in Serbia never go fast enough and never quite as you would have it. This is a fact. You have to understand when you do this work, you need endless patience and wait for things to happen. We had a period in Serbia until 29, at which time we didn't even have an integrated, organized response, just response. After that, there was a law on emergencies to establish one integrated service to manage emergencies. Very weak initially, technically, and in terms of human resources. And then you had 2014. We've heard from Mr. Blagojevic. Unprecedented disaster in Serbia and a very dramatic change that happened afterwards. So what actually happened? I will agree with Mr. Blagojevic that in 2015 and 2016, all of the risks present in Serbia do very much refer to flooding, but they showed us something important when it comes to response. We need better cooperation between different sectors and authorities. We need concerted action and agreements between ministries of defense, interior, and other sectoral ministries. Currently, it is at a much better level than what it used to be. Now, we also have a different situation at local level. Those working in local municipalities have changed their mindset. They changed due to the difficulties that they faced. So response has changed for the better in Serbia, and this needs to be said loud and clear, and we need to be happy for this, because this process has not ended. It is a process which needs to continue. What is not good? Still, we are not doing enough when nothing is happening. And we've detected this 2 years ago together with our friends from UNDP and the Public Investment Management Office. And this is what we want to change. Now is the time to push forward for the new DRR law, for new emergencies law, in order to change also the mindset when it comes to prevention, not only response. We are currently finalizing public debates of these proposed laws. On the 29th, this is an invitation for all of you, there will be the final public debate and public consultations for the law, after which there will be the normal legislative procedure for the adoption. And I think we are raising the bar in this important segment, which is thinking about prevention. Firstly, by introducing measures that were lacking before. Some will say you always introduce new obligations for local governments, they don't have the resources. But believe me, the key thing to change is the way of thinking. Good organization of utilities doesn't really require huge resources. Cleaning riverbeds, small rivers. Of course, there are other authorities working in order to provide continued funding for prevention. And I think this law gives us good arguments why we need it. And I am very pleased by the fact that although this law was drafted 2 years ago, in the meantime we realized that we could further improve it, and I think we did. And the public debates that are currently underway are demonstrating this. There haven't been many criticisms. I think we are increasing the quality of life in this aspect. The law, once adopted, will not bring fruits overnight, but will create opportunities for us to change the thinking in the years ahead. And once we do that, things go in a good way. And let me just say a number of good news. We are finalizing the law on critical infrastructure. We are finalizing the law on firefighting, good practices in firefighting. Why am I saying this? And people will say it is not all about laws, where is the money and so on. It is true, but believe me, when it comes to emergencies, you need to change your laws over time until they are fully harmonized to the needs, until they lead to increasing quality of life, and until you achieve the values that you aspire for. And I'm fully convinced that this set of new laws, and once we establish continuity in funding, this I think is key in order to make progress. With that, what we do will be in a good direction, on a good track. I'm sure there will be more emergencies. Fires are still a risk which take most lives. Flooding, droughts, earthquakes. Yesterday there was a minor earthquake in Knić. So these are the risks, and we need to recognize them and get ready for that, prepare. You can never be perfect in that. It cannot happen overnight, but you need year in, year out to raise capacities, and this is our plan. And I repeat, in Serbia, along with patience, you do, in the end, wait to see, you get to see the result. I wanted also to say that apart from changing laws, we can change our ways of thinking. We've seen this in Serbia with respect to response. Now we will see it with respect to prevention. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, colleague who's our first neighbor of the Republic of Serbia, colleague from Montenegro, Mr. Ljuban Mušić, head of the Directorate for Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid of the Ministry of Interior of the Government of Montenegro from 2013, and who has more than 10 years of experience in working in civil protection area. He participated in many international programs concerning civil protection and risk reduction. He's the national coordinator of the IPA program, and he is participating in designing national plans for disaster reduction. He's author of many publications. Mr. Mušić, the floor is yours. Thank you, Sandra. So I would like to greet you first. I would like to say that I'm extremely pleased to be here in Belgrade today, because I went to university here in Belgrade, Faculty of Security, here in Gospodara Vučića Street. I see only one professor. Maybe we have some younger generations that I do not recognize, so I apologize. I'm really pleased to tell you something from the Montenegro perspective about this topic. I will try to complement, to add the things to what Peja said, because we've been through the same troubles in these years. Troubles start from not understanding, decision makers not understanding, not realizing. Then there's too big of an interest after something happens. Then people all once again forget after the things pass. So in principle, we're trying everything that was some former Yugoslavia was doing. We're going to go back on these tracks. Yes, we might be subjective, but this was stated by many experts from other European countries who say that this was good. They were copying the system from the former Yugoslavia. We had some smarter business, and now we're slowly coming back to that. Some things that were great, well organized, we're trying to do this once again right now. I will start with the Sendai framework because I think it's really important. Important because somewhat it made a clear difference, clear priorities, objectives of what needs to happen in the next 15 years. Sendai framework, for the first time, this is a first framework, and which is harmonized with the European Commission. So European Commission and UNSDR harmonized on the roadmap for implementing the Sendai framework. Presidents of our country had to sign this. After that, the parliaments had to ratify this in Istanbul. I think it happened 3 years ago, which is definitely a huge step forward, so that we could have a good background to talk about this and to insist on this. Through the negotiating chapter 27, the environment and climate changes, we are part of this, and our colleagues from the sector for emergency management, they are also a part of this negotiating chapter. They will have the obligation to report on this. We already have been reporting for several years now. We are reporting on what we've done in line with certain questions that the European Commission asks us, and in line with the Sendai framework. So we think this is really important because we're going beyond a framework that was not maybe mandatory for everybody, but it's clear now. This is mandatory, and the questions are clear. And sometimes we fear those questions. Sometimes we're glad to have these questions, but we're hoping that in December we will have a meeting about this. Montenegro is now in the final phase of creating the national strategy for disaster risk reduction with the action plan for the next 6 years. So this is the first obligation of all countries who have signed the Sendai framework, who are participating in UNISDRs and UN organization, etc. Montenegro, by the end of this year, will have this strategy established, and the strategy will actually enable us to, hopefully in the next 6-year period, to implement them much more easily. So in this strategy, you will find activities that we've certainly mentioned, and previous speakers also mentioned, and future speakers will mention. So multi-sectoral spatial planning, this is a crucial thing maybe for prevention, in my opinion. So multi-sectoral spatial planning, so that our special plans on any level do not work only with fires, for example. Sometimes I say, when somebody gets me angry, I say, they do not do this in the proper way. We do not treat landslides, earthquakes. I'm talking about Montenegro, and I'm talking about the region in general. I think you would agree with me. So what do we have? We have that, for example, we have facilities and people who stay in the areas where they should not be staying. And the final thing that we have, lives at risk. And unfortunately, sometimes we have lives that are lost. Small digression, Montenegro was lucky in the past 10 years. And we are literally saying this, we were lucky with the number and with the quantity and the quality of the natural disasters that hit us. But whenever we want to raise the level of awareness about this topic, we use, unfortunately, the situation from Serbia or from Bosnia and Herzegovina. We've had a terrible situation in 2012 and in 2010 and 2011. We had floods in 2012. We had the state of emergency because of snow. We will always be, and this is our professional duty, we will always have this duty to want more and not to be satisfied with what's done. And certainly that we will try to do this in our work lives, and the new generations will continue with this. We in Montenegro want to do a lot more things in this area. Sandra asked the question concerning the resources, concerning the awareness of people, human capacities, human resources. I want to say that in Montenegro, as far as I know, we're the only country in the region, the only country of the former Yugoslavia who has established the intersectoral program for disaster risk reduction. So you remember, in former Yugoslavia, we had school subjects, and people from the Faculty of Securities were educated to be professors of this subject. We had this subject in primary and secondary schools. We have this subject in universities. In this subject, people were educated about what they needed to know and what they need to do during emergencies, to make it simple. So we managed, with UNICEF's help. I'm not sure if we were able to do this alone. So with UNICEF help in 2013, we established this program, this curriculum. This means that we and the colleagues from Institute for Education, we added some additional subjects. So for example, professor of geography teaches earthquakes, says everything about earthquakes, the types, scales, parameters, but he doesn't say to children what they need to do before, during, and after the earthquake. And this program was created that teachers educate children on what to do. It's not enough just to know what the earthquake is. They need to know what they should do before, during, and after an earthquake. We educate teachers, teachers educate children. This is a continuous raising of awareness of the entire, all the people who go through primary and secondary schools. We are very proud of that, and we hope that this will give a result. It will not yield a result in the first years, but maybe in the years ahead of us, because we have a huge gap from 1991 to today, or several years back, huge gap about learning about this topic, about perception of what this topic means. We in Montenegro had several national action plans. We did a lot of municipal plans. There are companies who have their business plans. It can always be done better, and there will always be room for improvement. The point is just to perceive that we need to think about emergencies like they could happen right now at this moment, and we should know where the exits are. You know, these pictograms tell us about this. So we need to live with this as if it will never happen, but it will definitely happen. Just to remind you, the earthquake in 1979, Sandra, just one more minute, I hope I have one more minute. In 1979, we have this earthquake that had a regional aspect, and I would like to mention the international comparison when it comes to this earthquake. 101 victims in Montenegro, 24 victims in Albania in one earthquake. Montenegro is the member of the Mechanism of Civil Protection, just like Serbia. Montenegro last year has become a member of NATO. Believe me, we've had a chance this summer to realize what this international existence looks like. Consider it, and we consider it as extremely important, because there is no possibility for a country to have all the necessary capacities for responding to natural disasters. No, Japan doesn't have that, California doesn't have that, and California is almost always on fire, not to mention the others. This assistance was very important for us. It was important even before, and I'm sure it will be important in the future. In our countries, we need to establish the concepts of support as host countries. We need to use this assistance in the best possible way, in the adequate way. And of course, we need to work on continuous education of the decision makers on all levels. What Serbia is very successfully doing, and we are not satisfied in Montenegro, this is continuous education of decision makers. Why? Because the president of municipalities are the most responsible people on the municipal level when it comes to this topic. If we do not have an educated president of municipality and all their management, entire office, all the other heads of secretariats, then the response at the local level will be poor. And then the state, in most of the cases, cannot help in the appropriate level, to the appropriate level. So we are going through this process. We know clearly what our goals are. Sometimes we encounter understanding. Sometimes we get support. But sometimes we really want something to happen. We want the attention of the public to turn to this, to turn to us who are talking about this every day. I mean, hopefully nothing will happen, but yes, I prepared a couple of more things to say, but I want to respect the time, and I'm expecting I will have questions for you so I can elaborate later. And once again, I would like to thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you, Ljuban.
There will be time for discussion and questions to which the panelists can respond and add something to their presentations. The next speaker, and I'm very pleased to have gender equality here in this panel. We are 3 to 3, which doesn't too much happen in this kind of work. DRR and response to emergencies is somehow reserved more for men. But this trend is changing. I know much has changed in Serbia, especially in Belgrade, where we have many members of fire and rescue units being women. And I now wish to invite Daniela Bozanic, head of the Climate Change Unit in the Ministry of Environment. She is a meteorologist by profession, and for 20 years she is intensely involved in climate change issues. Please tell us, Daniela, how can we adapt to climate change and be more resilient? Thank you, Sandra. Let me say at the outset that I'm very pleased that finally, officially and publicly, there is a link made between DRR and climate change, because definitely one or the other are always together. As for climate change and the key topic of today's conference, DRR, it is very much related to the new concept of adjustments. And we've mentioned here already that the essence of adjustment to climate change, adaptation to climate change, it boils down to timely and efficient response to natural disasters, and on the other hand, it requires a somewhat different concept, not only mindset, but something that we often omit. It is a concept of building and constructing infrastructure, engineering in general. I would say this is possibly one of the key challenges in the period ahead of us. There is also the fact that we cannot continue building as we used to. Climate scenarios are not done just for nothing. They are not just parts of reports that we are obliged to submit as a ministry or as a country to the EU or to the global communities. Rather, climate scenarios need to be, among other things, used in order to increase resilience to disasters. As for capacities, obviously I was ready for your question. As for capacities, the key is that capacities exist, but possibly for a long period of years they were not used in the best possible manner. And certainly there's been lack of information exchange, cooperation between different levels of government, especially at local level. And what is certainly missing and often forgotten is that response does not mean response by one municipality. Sustainability in planning, reducing vulnerability, reducing impact requires a broader approach and regional planning. From the point of view of adaptation, this regional would not mean between regions of Serbia, but regions of the Western Balkans, because one municipality or one state can do its best, but if countries upstream fail to do so, we again have a risk. So definitely I think capacities do exist, and in recent years we are moving in the direction of better allocating these capacities. What we need to work more strongly on is general understanding of the need to respond, and I personally do not think that we should stick only to global and EU legislation and doing it as a commitment of our country under those instruments. Rather, I think we need it for our own sake. And we've seen this many times in many summer droughts and the floodings that we've faced, which goes to say that what we do, we need to do for our own sake. A good question asked here is about data. It is very difficult to come by some data, while at the same time different authorities have these data. So from the point of view of adaptation, we definitely are in dire need for systemic, continued collection of data, for databases that would be accessible to all those who need it. And we need, on top of this, that it is not enough to have any form of data, because data doesn't always come in adequate forms. And I'm saying this from experience in my sector. It often happens that we like to think that we have data, but the quality is not sufficient. We need to verify and to establish better data systems. And let me briefly mention funding. I often feel and have the impression that lack of funding is very often a good excuse not to do anything. And I think, yes, certainly huge investments are needed, but even with some superficial analysis, looking back and what was done wrong in the past, you will see the funding needed, because by reducing wasting funds in other areas, maybe we could provide this necessary funding. So I think even the issue of funding, if we have better cooperation, if we don't duplicate research, analysis, and so on, if we exchange results, if we do more of a regional approach, I think this will make funding needs lower. I was brief, like my CV, like my biography, but I am available for questions, of course.
Thank you, Daniela. Now, Jelena Matić-Varenica will address you. Jelena is Assistant Director of the Sector for Topography and Cartography of the Geodetic Survey of Serbia. She has several years of implementation of developmental projects and on activities on creating and developing spatial data. Jelena, the floor is yours. Thank you, Sandra. First of all, thank you. I would like to thank organizers for recognizing that the Geodetic Survey should participate in this meeting. We are not institutions who has citizens directly coming to us in emergencies, but we can help in many phases, in preventions, in the response, and even later in rehabilitation and assessment of the damages. What I would like to say in the beginning, this was a good introduction when it comes to data. Data are the key topic. I would like to give you a citation from a extraordinary story about risk. Why those information are important, how everything concerns information in decision making. Information that I have is not the information I want. Information that I want is not the information I need. Information that I need is not the information that I could get. and the information that I could get costs more than I would like to pay for it. And I'm afraid that very often this happens in the Republic of Serbia. This scenario very often happens here. Why are data important for sustainable development? We often use this term, sustainable development. Sustainable development is nothing else but this eternally conflicted idea between economic development on one side and then development on the society on the other side. Sustainable development on society and the standards and environmental protection, for example. And of course, this is all connected with the special resources in the area where we live. Just by that, changes are constant. In order to monitor these changes, we need to know that they have the special component, whether they are happening globally, regionally, locally, whatever. And they also have this time component. Either they are frequent, they maybe happens once in 120 years. In order to have management in crisis situations, we need to have this special information about locations, sites, characteristic features, what we have there in this area, what's the infrastructure, etc., etc. What are the limitations in this area? Of course, without special data, this is not possible. Now, when we talk about this resilience, of course, if we have sustainable development of all the natural resources, this affects the resilience of society to adapt to those changes. If we talk about crises, emergencies, it's important to say that, for example, in a general sense, this resilience of society means, first of all, quick response, quick recovery, mitigating consequences, and of course, lately having in mind the frequency of those changes, we need to adapt to those changes. So these measures are really different, various, depending on the development of the population, depending on the infrastructure, depending on where there are developed plans for prevention and mitigating consequences, depending on many things. And it's important to make, and we heard about this, it's important to make adequate decisions. Adequate decisions could be obtained only if you have proper information. Without that, you cannot get proper decisions. And what's important to say when we talk about the capacities that need to be developed from the aspect of geospatial data, since I come from the geosector, I will focus on this aspect. We all know that strengthening economic conditions is very important because we have lower losses in municipalities. And one other important thing is that we need to develop and improve the social capital, develop resources, so establish partnerships both in the public sector and between the public and private sector, and of course you develop services for public goods. From the aspect of geospatial data, it's very important to establish a good infrastructure for geospatial data in the Republic of Serbia. And what does this mean? You have probably heard about this term. This is not the infrastructure of the geodetic survey, but all the institutions of the Republic of Serbia who use this infrastructure, maintain it, or who produce geospatial data. First important thing to say is there's almost 90% of decisions that you make in any aspect is concerning geospatial data. So geospatial data are therefore very important. So they directly impact the increase of the economic productivity because they add value to the data. And just by using them, this value grows. What's important to say and what needs to be developed in the Republic of Serbia is the legislation, where all the entities are clearly recognized, all the responsible entities for certain sets of key data. When I say key data, those are the data that are important on the national level for work of all the institutions and all the competencies. We need to adopt the policy of open data, especially for the needs of emergencies, which is extremely important. And of course, we need to establish certain work bodies, legislative bodies, technical bodies, bodies dealing with cooperation and other areas. We need to establish then a system of cooperation and coordination. Unfortunately, we had a chance to see this in 2014. This was not very, very good, but the situation is improving both on the local and the central level. And data, not just data, but metadata, data about data, to know what the quality of the data we have is. And the most important thing is to define and ensure the key data, and later this data need to be standardized and harmonized. This doesn't have to be EU standards, but it is recommended. Since we are striving for joining the EU, we are trying to implement the directives, etc. But we can develop national standards that need to be implemented. Why? Because only this way everybody at all levels can make the same decision, because the data need to be interoperable. Of course, we need to provide access to the services offering this data. because without this, the data does not have the added value. And we need to have to define the system for exchanging and protecting the data. So on the local level, we need to develop this technical infrastructure, but we also need to develop professional capacities. It is necessary to educate everybody on the central level and on the local level. This is extremely important. With the development of technology, there are concepts of open code, open software, many different various solutions. It doesn't take a lot of money for this, and they can contribute to managing emergencies. And another important thing, and this has been mentioned in the draft, this was mentioned in the draft law, we need to establish a central platform for managing in these situations, where actually the key data will be located, because this central, let's call it database, enables searching, query, analysis, names of certain applications, and even using some external services of other institutions and that will be available to all relevant stakeholders at different levels of access. And of course, this needs to be established with the national standards for uniform decision making. The next thing, the next question that we had for this panel is the role of the geospatial data. And I've highlighted this several times, both for prevention, emergencies, assessment of damages. We had the chance to see this in 2014, and also for planning activities on rehabilitation of damages and for reconstruction. What I would like to say, it's important to have updated data in cases of emergencies. But no other piece of data from the archives should be neglected, because based on this data, we can determine a lot of things. The frequency of those occurrences, their tendency, special tendency, how frequent they are, how we should respond. It's important to say we mentioned maybe the Inspire directive. This is directive of the European Commission that was adopted back in 2007. Primarily adopted, it governs the area of standardization of geospatial data for the needs of environmental protection. But this has such a broad use that it's practically used everywhere in all other areas. And we've started with translating this Inspire, transposing this directive. The law is actually transposing this directive, and it is up to the government of Serbia to adopt it right now. Another important thing is that with this agenda for sustainable development 2030, you have 17 goals. Out of all these 17 goals, 9 are directly connected. Their implementation and monitoring are directly connected with the geospatial data, with the use of geospatial data. Others are connected indirectly. There is no goal where geospatial data do not play a significant role. And of course, this was adopted in 2015. Already in 2016, declaration was adopted in the government of Serbia for managing geospatial data in order to have good land administration. Without good land administration, there's no good planning. When it comes to the data that we're missing, I'm not going to talk about the aspect of all the institutions of the Republic of Serbia, but I can tell you from the aspect of the Geodetic Survey of Serbia, there are data we need to work on in terms of improving their quality, updating them, centralizing them, and in this way, enabling more transparent availability of the data to the state institutions. And what's extremely important, in my opinion, and I think it's missing, we need to define a focal point for satellite system data in emergencies, which is extremely important. You need to have an institution that is in charge. We need to give them a task to collect data in a certain areas. Unfortunately, in 2014, we had a case where we, as the Geodetic Survey, who had a development of project in this moment, and where we were able to provide the satellite images for the flood-affected areas, we had several institutions turning to us. They were busy. I don't know. There are other reasons. Maybe they didn't know and they couldn't provide us with the information which areas they needed. And then we contacted Republic Hydrometeorological Institute. We asked them where do they expect the most rainfall. They said Obrenovac, Western Serbia. We collected the data for this area and we processed the data. This was a good example how these data are used in several purposes later. For example, for creating a report for damage assessment, and even later for reconstruction, where, for example, in the area of Krupanj, people use this data as evidence that after 2 months, water went through this land, the houses shouldn't be built then. Also, insurance company later use this data. And the most important thing is that based on this data, we use the methodology for developing new products. For example, index of humidity of soil in the Republic of Serbia, which is an important parameter, having in mind that droughts are one of the key natural disasters affecting the Republic of Serbia. Formats need to be readable by machines, but they need just the structure of data needs to be systematized. They need to be standardized, need to be in the same system. Very often, when we were providing data to other institutions to the local level, they couldn't use those data because they were not interoperable with the data that they have. And of course, they need to be harmonized in line with the technical specifications of the Inspire Directive, which would then enable good cross-border cooperation, which in this case, in emergencies, this is extremely important. How innovations of the technologies can contribute. They can contribute a lot. For several times we mentioned databases, devices, systems for monitoring, etc. So first of all, you improve the quality of data. The databases become more transparent. The data availability is becoming more transparent. You improve the system of cooperation and exchange of data. Then there are many IT solutions that provide the use of this geospatial data in a different way compared to what we've been used in the previous period, using some tables, statistics. Then you have modern communication solutions that enable collecting and dissemination of data and interinstitutional communication between all the institutions participating in emergencies. Of course, GNS technologies, positioning satellite systems of different types for collecting spatial data. And effective automatic processing, also another aspect that helps in response during the emergencies. And another interesting thing, we've heard several times, that public needs to be in public. We call this awake citizens. Whether this is NGOs or citizens themselves, many applications based on open source solutions can contribute to disseminating information about what's happening on the ground, so that information can reach them before services can notify them. So also monitoring changes, this is enabled by technologies. And introducing technologies is a trigger for education, and I think that education is number one. After everything else comes after education. The costs are lowered, multiple use, and we generate this added value, which is extremely important. That would be it for me right now. If you have any questions, feel free.
Otvorila diskusiju.
Thank you, Jelena. This is time for discussion. This is time also for you to raise your questions for our panelists. The first question over there. I am Slobodan Knežević from the BirdLife International Partners for Serbia. I'd like, and I see that we've had comments here about my interest. There are many faces that I know here. In fact, not many, only 2 or 3, and this tells me that I don't see you in nature protection, and you never mentioned nature here as a mechanism for protection and for better resilience of societies. I'd like to say that we've had an incident, a disaster, in the National Park Kopaonik. In the first area of protection, we had a deforestation event, 3,000 meters cubic. This is 250 trucks of wood from the first zone of protection. For comparison purposes, in our country, 70% of the national territory is under a certain form of protection, be it national park or something else. But the first zone of protection is in 0.1 per mils. So this was major felling of trees. And why am I raising this? Because here we didn't hear much or anything about nature protection. We've heard about flooding. We've heard about problems in Tekia with landslides, but we didn't hear that a remedy for this can, among other things, be nature protection and preventing felling of trees and deforestation in order to overcome poverty and provide income for households. So my question is for Mr. Predrag Maric. How much is the sector for emergency management taking into consideration this fact that we need this natural sponge, this buffer of nature? And the question, of course, can be for other panelists if they feel invited to comment. Other questions? Do we hear some more questions and then respond to all of them? Microphone, please. We cannot hear the speaker. I'm very sorry. No, we cannot hear. I wish to greet you all. I'm Sonja Pavlovic, independent MP in the National Assembly of Serbia, by profession an architect. And for 30 years, I've been active in water management. I've listened very carefully to the panelists, and I have a couple of questions which are very important for me. And I'd like also to give some comments about the 2014 flooding, because I heard something here that I don't want to hear again. At that time, the director of the Serbia Water Management told us that only God could help us. At that time, it did, but I think we all agree that that is not sufficient, and we should not rely on that. What I wish to ask all the panelists, our colleague from Montenegro said that we should have multi-sectoral spatial planning. Daniela told us that special attention will be paid to construction. And I ask the following. If we respect all the laws in place, this should not be a problem, because we have climate zones identified for Serbia. We have seismic zones. We have landslides mapped. We have protection zones mapped for certain watercourses and national parks. And when we construct legally, there are no problems. There are procedures that we need to go by, and we have it. But what happens with informal and illegal construction? This is what I'm interested in, and this, I think, was a major factor in previous disasters and will continue to be a big problem irrespective of the laws, unless the procedures are fully complied with. So I'd like to hear comments about this. May sound very simple, but it is also complex when it comes to putting it in practice. So what happens when we have illegally built structures or illegal deforestation, illegal management of national parks? Thank you for asking the question. Let's hear another question and then have some answers. Is the mic now working? Can I please ask you to come out here? Sorry for this. Good day. I I greet you all. I'm Gordana Naumovska from Macedonia, Center for Crisis Management. I wish, first of all, to express great understanding for our panelists. It takes them a time to say what they are doing already and what they plan to do. I apologize for my Serbian not being perfect, but I'm doing my best. You mentioned multi-sectoral approach. You mentioned coordination. I'd like you, please, if you could, explain how this is done in Serbia and in Montenegro, all authorities in charge, so that firstly, we could have proper response. To have that, we need to identify the stakeholders who have resources, who have plans in place, who can respond to every risk that can result in a big problem. And secondly, how is use of resources coordinated? How are response plans implemented? At local level, it is a bit more easy. There is the mayor, there are the utilities, and you see how coordination is done. But how does a state do this for preparedness, early warning, response? Because we have risks of natural disasters such as flooding, earthquakes, and others. But when it comes to combined risks, we need more resources, we need more institutions, and in such situations, coordination happens in a different way. Thank you very much.
I would kindly like to ask the panelists to answer those questions, and then if there's more questions, we will move forward. Mr. Maric, I would like to thank everybody for your questions. First, maybe I would like to go in order. I remember the first question was about protecting nature. I have nothing to add, nothing to subtract to what you said. From my point of view, this relationship comes from the family, from home. If we do not have this at home, it's difficult to regulate this, impose this by any law. I know about this problem of forests because this is a painful story in Serbia, unfortunately. You have this division between the state-owned, privately owned forests. You have the fact that the fire escape routes, water captures, this doesn't exist. We have national parks, we have financial problems, we are trying to do something about early warnings of fire. So this is the story. It's enough to recall 2012, 17 days of fire, precisely because you need to do in parallel all those things that should have been done before. The question is to which degree to this law, how to highlight this to this law. I'm inviting you to come to on the 29th. There's this public debate. You as association or as individual, we will be able to address us to suggest something if you think that this is not highlighted enough, maybe. So it's good to speak up about this. Floods, let's say, most frequently we have floods. Who do floods affect the most? You will agree, the poor people. Where do they live? They live in structures where it's not allowed to build structures. When did this start? Last year? No, it started some 40 years ago. And this is Pandora's box. Our idea is that this new law should say it's enough. You draw a line, it says it's enough. There are zones of immediate risk where it is not allowed to build a structure, build a building. For 2 years, we've been working on this together with the office. We want to establish this, Now you're asking me what to do with those people who have already done something like this. Why don't you break this down? Why don't you remove this? You know what? When I see where we participated, all the people that we were saving, I swear to you, 90% of those people are people who live in the buildings where no structure should exist. Surrounding Kraljevo, so many cases. It's important that we should stay. It cannot go like this anymore. Draw a line. And to tell you honestly, if I had a magic wand, what to do with the objects built in the previous 40 years. Do we as a society have the money to demolish or to remove? The issue of legalization is a complex issue, When you admit to somebody that he has a house in the river basin, natural retention. What's up to us to save those human lives? There, all the people are saying to us, illegal construction, illegal constructions, people are the same. But it's a good question, not just for the panelists, but for all the participants today. What to do and how to resolve this. This is a huge problem. Well, I would like to thank you, and I would like to answer those questions from Montenegro perspective. To add something about this legalization issue, I will not forget my colleague who talked about forests, asked about forests. We adopted the law on legalization of non-formal structures. This story started for 9 months. All the informal objects, illegal objects actually, their owners need to submit a request for legalization. What are the illegal objects now? We have two completely different, very different categories. We have illegal objects built in really problematic zones, Montenegro and Podgorica, entire coastal area, 9th degree of seismic risk. This is one thing. Another thing, we have facilities constructed in normal zones, not so problematic zones, but they had no plans for this, no detailed urban planning for this. Those are also, they also belong to illegal structure categories. And you have a third category, populations after 1999. A lot of population came to Montenegro. In my municipality in Berana in the north, management back then placed those people in barracks in the valley of the river Lim. And this settlement was called Riverside. And now we reach the fact how to respond to that. Believe me, it's not easy at all. However much we want to resolve this, it would be the best thing for us for those structures not to exist. We will not be dealing with them. One good example I will tell you, I don't know if some of you went to the River Crnevica. This is a nice place. In Reci Crnevica you have illegal objects and legal objects. When you do rescue and evacuation, then you have the next phase, damage assessment. And now I would like to add to what colleague was told us about data. In damage assessment, what do? Can we treat in the same way damages in the legal structures and in illegal structures? For us, all the people are the same. We have them as numbers, a piece of data. We have the number of people we evacuated and we saved, and we are happy. But what to do after that? There's a gap here concerning damage assessment and the data about damage assessment. And concerning multisectoral analysis of hazards. Why? Because in our special plans in Montenegro, we have the topic of fire. However much we are exposed to earthquakes, you have to understand, in order for me to investor to get the construction permits, in all the documents, the only document concerning any hazards is the elaborate document about protection from fires. And that's a problem, because from this we have that somebody wrote what this document should have. I built my facility in line with this. But when you go to Budva and you're coming back from Budva, you know, you could see one house that is leaning over. This is the village of Markovic, very, very well-known village. For 20-something years, we've determined it is a problematic village. There's a landslide, allowed construction, landslide, the house is now leaning over. We need to have a response of the entire state and society. So as Peja says, now we say it's enough. However chaotic things are or not. Of course, taking into account the role of the experts. When it comes to the question from our colleague from Macedonia, basically we are not seen in the right way when we talk about coordination. Many of us, you will hear a lot of questions, you know. Some people even think, when they say in cafe places, they think that we are Batmans or Supermans who will resolve everything. No, we cannot resolve everything. It's clear, like in any other country, we have established levels of coordination when we talk about this topic. In Great Britain, you will see 3 levels, golden, silver, bronze level. You will find this in Serbia, in Montenegro. It's only a question of the level of knowledge of decision makers and the data that are available. If we do not have relevant data, and we do not have them to the measure that we would like to have them, because we're always reaching some software solutions that are problematic from the aspects of payment. In order to have this, we have our national plans then who have a part of story about data, but in this data we do not call gender structure, age structure, disability, all the other things. Then we, as doing the rescue, people who are managing the system, we are in the situation that we do not know what's waiting for us. no data about what type of people are waiting for us over there, not to mention all the other things. And when we talk about the teams, coordination teams, you will encounter similar problems everywhere in the region. You know the problems in Macedonia as well. They're all the same problems. The question of perception of the decision makers, and of course our task is to be persistent. However much they see us as boring, we have to be persistent. All of them who go through this cycle, decision makers, whether a 4-year cycle or 5-year cycle, or at any other level, we have to educate them in order for the state's response to be adequate. So to translate this for you, today's structure, I saw the deputy mayor, I think, here, he was here. He's a mayor today. He doesn't know what he will be in 2 years. Maybe another person will come. So this other person and the one after him needs to go to the process of education. And then we will have adequate response, only then. And I will finish with the forests. In Montenegro, forests are also a problem. Problem forests from the aspect of the use and all the other aspects, cutting down the trees. This leads, of course, to floods, landslides, etc. So basically, through laws on forests, we've managed to resolve it somewhat. We have one part concerning the strategy for forest management. We have this as a document. We have something called concession agreements. We have forests owned by public companies who are still not strong enough in order to be able to respond adequately. Public enterprise, national parks. We have 5 national parks in Montenegro. We have the Skadar Lake, we have the Lovćen Mountain. I'm sure you went to there, you seen this. So those are all processes which are unfortunately, they take time. It takes a lot of time to reach results. It cannot be done quickly. Rest assured that we who are working with the forests, wherever we have the season of fires, as we call it, we have a headache from forests and from all those unresolved things. But this is a process, and I'm sure that we in the region are improving this, and that one day we will manage to end this, 100% sure. Some people who are burning forests or fields because they do not want to mow it, and they then burn the forest, they will end up in prison. And just one example, I'll finish with this. This summer we had a Polish man who came to a hill over the city of Bar. He got lost, and officially he was a scout who was in sandals. He went in sandals, trekking in the hill, in those flip-flops actually. So somebody told him that he should start a fire in order for them to be able to locate him. This fire started a chaos in this area over the bar. This man ended up in prison, you know. When these policies apply for our citizens, where they need to clean their fields and make sure what they will do if this fire spread, only after that we will have better results, and we will not have the situations that we will be exposed in the media as guilty for not doing our works. Peja, I'm sure, agrees. Countless number of times we were to blame, and a lot of those times we were wondering, why us? Believe me, it's not easy, it's not up to us, but we have a problem with awareness, even with the foreigners. Thank you. If I can add, I do not want to go into illegal or legal construction as a problem, but yes, we have climate zones, but as long as we stick to those climate zones, if we don't take account climate changes or expected climate changes, I'm afraid that illegal and legal construction will not be the only problem. We have 2 more questions here, and the third one, but let's try, since this session is almost ending. So, okay, the microphone is working, please. Hello, my name is Ljiljana Sovic from the Forest Administration. Maybe this will not be a question. Maybe I will just try to answer this question by the colleague from NGO concerning the deforestation in Kopaonik Mountain. So this is in line with the topic of today's meeting, because what's obvious, and the colleague from Environmental Protection knows, and a lot of people here know, direct consequence of climate change is the process of deforestation of forests in Serbia that started in 2012. This was really obvious to a huge extent. A rough estimate is 10%. Although we as forest management, we started several projects in order to determine the scope of drying and the causes of actually drying. So around 10% of coniferous forests because those forests are not representative for Serbia. There's 11% compared to the entire forest area. But what I wanted to say, those drying, we started from Tara, unfortunately reached Kopaonik, and Kopaonik definitely, whoever went to Kopaonik as a tourist, they can notice this gray color of forest. This is not the forest, the green forest that we would all like to see, but what's happening is the process of drying out. You know, when you have a trigger, small climate changes, then you have the entire factors, fungi, they are all contributing to this. And now I have to directly move to this statement. It's great that the NGO sector is monitoring what's happening in the Serbian forests, because you're helping us who are actually fighting illegal deforestation. But what's going on, what's happening in Kopaonik is the deforestation. I do not have all the data, but I know, but the National Park of Kopaonik created a rehabilitation plan based on a project, scientific project, which try to respond how to stop this. There was a rehabilitation plan drafted with the consent from the Institute for Protection of Nature was obtained. Also, colleague Daniela can tell me if I'm mistaken, but also the Ministry of Environment gave their consent. I don't know how much wood is allowed to be cut down, but I have to say that cutting down woods in the national park in the first level of protection is not illegal. So this was done based on the plan, because we know that in general at the first level of protection all deforestation is prohibited. But this is a situation when you have normal conditions, meaning normal climate, when it is left up to the nature to mark what's nature has to mark what's dry. What happened in Kopaonik when we left this to nature in the first zone? Trees started drying, you know. Anybody who went there, I went in this core where drying out started 3 years ago. The year after that, there were concentric circles spreading, really threatening this first level of protection. I don't want to defend, believe me, people from the forestry. Sometimes they see us as we are in confrontation with the environment, because those forests are preserved partially thanks to our professions and people from the forestry management. Of course, I do not have all the data available. Verify whether, and then you have nothing in this first degree, or maybe try, in line with existing legislation, try to rehabilitate this situation. And just allow me one more minute. 2 years ago, the parliament adopted the amendment of the law on forests, which significantly made the punishment measures much more severe in order to combat this illegal deforestation. And we have completely exact indicators, precise indicators, that by working, we have 400 cubics per year. We're not happy. It still means that we have illegal deforestation, but we are much efficient now, and we're hoping that we will manage to combat this illegal deforestation. We have 2 more questions. I would just like you to be really brief, because we have already run out of time for this panel. It's not a question, more of a comment. And there were so many good prompts by panelists for this, and I cannot avoid saying this. My name is Aida Chorovic. Some will ask what I'm doing here. For several several decades, I've been fighting for human rights. I have a status of international defender of human rights, and I would like to draw your attention, try to give you my point of view from what I'm doing. Some 15 years ago, I was in a team of people who were working with the Prime Minister Djindjic in the processes concerning the reduction of poverty. And back then, I learned that the human rights and poverty have direct correlation. When I learned about the DRR, when I learned something about this, I realized that there's also correlation. Human rights and disaster risk management are in direct correlation. And I would like to thank the panelists for mentioning this through their addresses. There is no single person who is not precious. Even the people, in the wheelchairs. People in the wheelchairs who are educated, they can be much more cooperative. I don't know what word to use. They can be much more useful at one point during a disaster than compared to them not being educated. Kolega Tmušić is talking about wonderful experience from Montenegro, that they already started introducing this into the education system. It's wonderful, and I know that there's intention to incorporate this into our education system, to incorporate something similar. But until we reach this point, when young people are being educated, I'm afraid that by then we will lose many generations. And that's why NGOs, I think, are very precious associates for these types of educations, to do it on the local level. On the local level, they are extremely important. The citizens, I would like to thank my colleague Jelena Matić-Varelica, who spoke about the participation of citizens. I work on a similar project called Guardians of Cities. And I want to say another thing also, participation of women, the capacities of women, their energy, knowing the local familiarity with the local level, everything they can contribute to on the local level, this can be immensely important. For months, I've been also working on a project concerning creating a special curriculum, and I will finish with this. This story about including citizens in disaster risk management. This doesn't have to have only direct impact on disasters. This can be much broader. This could resolve the conflict situations. This could be very useful for reconciliation on the Balkans. This could be useful for reducing the radicalization of young people. So when we see this DRM, not from the expert side, when we expand it to the human rights story, this can be a tool that could help this region and any other region in the world help us live a better, healthier lives, etc., etc. So thank you. Thank you, Aida. We have one more question. My name is Goran Mitic. I come from Serbia Center for Green Economy. I would like to ask you on behalf of the Institute of Vinča, who projected a mini mobile for irrigation, solar machine for irrigation. Can this device be a part of equipment of the Centers for Emergency Response as a part of this firefighting equipment, because you have to put out the drafts? This is an important thing. Another thing, is it possible to think about mobile silos for irrigation, drip irrigation? People who saw this asked me about this. This can be integral part of the equipment for renting, along with protection from the sun. And we should maybe have an investment company behind this for renting this equipment. And also this machinery for quick extinguishing on fires. So without further ado, this is the essence of my question, to have for this to be a part of investment component and part of your technology. There are so many more topics, and I remember one villager from Čačak. He's asking, I bought impermeable foil. When I saw that there's no more, the stream dried out, I put foil and I introduced this drip irrigation system. People from Šabac also do something like this. So he's asking, can other villages get a loan for this, to buy this equipment? It will not be easy to answer those questions. So I'm asking if I'm a good person to answer those questions. When it comes to the companies, entities for protection and rescue, as we call them in Serbia, who can be formally on this list under certain conditions and whose capacities, and we're working on this through contracts between them and the state. Until now, it was done in different ways. When we have a trouble, please help us, we will settle the money. So this is something that we're striving for. I, as a head of the service, so simply, we need 1,000 things, you know. We cannot get enough equipment in 1 year or 5 years and say, now we're ready. No. We need a lot of things. This doesn't mean that we will not try to see all the solutions that can be useful for us in this segment. But the road that we're taking, you know, there's a list of entities for protection and rescue, the way they are put on the list, and these people can offer some solutions for response. And you can get this in communication with us, all those data, how this goes, you know. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Then we can... Okay, one more question from the audience, and then we'll conclude the session. Then we'll conclude the first part of the panel.
Alexander Matt, Organization for World Food Organization, FAO. You mentioned that in 2015 you could provide some satellite images. Is that your regular practice, or was this just that you could at that time provide satellite images? I think it's very good to have assessment for planning and for other processes. It's a very good question, and thank you for asking it. I did mention it. It was a development project. At that time, we could get from commercial providers such images, but currently we do not have this possibility except through the recently signed agreement with the Copernicus project funded by the European Space Agency, which has an emergency management program to enable such images. And we will be in this position, but this data is global. It provides a global picture. It can inform some basic response, but when you need high-quality data and images, for instance, to assess landslides, in Krupanj, for instance, we had 700 potential landslides identified. Then you have a need for high-resolution images, which comes from commercial providers. But yes, currently there are many programs when these are made available as public data in cases of emergencies. We've seen such cases in Sierra Leone and elsewhere, provided for free. There are crowdsourcing systems as well that you and other participants through different platforms can participate. The of forests, again provided by FAO and Open Forests. So they enable open data through Google Earth and others, even providing statistics through this platform, even mobile applications. So open to anyone because it is an open data platform. I noted, yes, that we would need a contact point that would be in charge of providing data of this kind in such cases. We don't have it in Serbia. There are institutions who could do that. And another key issue, we've heard earlier about it, key for the geodetic survey, we need to know where we have what kind and numbers of population, what we need to access these people and so on. So if you have illegal construction, we know there is more than 2 million such structures, and there are even more than that that are not at all recorded in the cadastre. To have all of the data that we need, all of the statistics, population statistics, you need to link them with spatial data, and only then well inform your plans. This is why the Geodetic Survey now started a campaign of establishing a register, a database of structures, whether they are legal or illegal. And this will be a good indicator to then, based on it, develop the address register, link this to statistics, and then move on to other assessments. In our new staffing plans, adopted 3 weeks ago, we plan to establish a Center for Management of Spatial Data, which would be a contact point between authorities and the private sector to ensure the efficient way. And this will have 3 groups. One is about national infrastructure of geodata, one for statistics and one for services. One of them will be in charge of developing methodologies needed in using geospatial data. Thank you, Jelena, and thank you all panelists for your good answers. Thank the audience for listening, for your active participation, for your questions. With this, I'd like to close today's panel. If there is time, Jelena prepared a short 3-minute video, I think very illustrative, by the European Space Agency about how satellite data is used in emergencies. So a few more moments of your patience, and after that we close the panel. Thank you.
Almost every week a natural disaster happens somewhere around the world. We often watch them unfold live on the news, when forests go up in flames, when settlements collapse after an earthquake, and roads and bridges are torn away by landslides, when volcanoes erupt or severe floods wash away our communities under torrents of water. When major disasters threaten, the lives of thousands can be put at risk. Time is of the essence, and rapid, accurate data can be crucial, particularly if search and rescue teams have to access very remote terrain. Today, satellites are some of the most helpful observers on our planet. From orbit, they can see through the clouds, detect storms and fires, and even reveal the slightest movement in the Earth's crust, literally anywhere in the world. However, satellites are always moving. They pass over a region affected by a disaster for only a few seconds, and return anywhere from hours to days later. It is unlikely that a single satellite would be in place to witness a disaster when it happens. But there are many satellites circling our planet, each on a different track and capturing different views of our Earth. The chance of getting the perfect picture of the disaster zone is much higher if rescue teams can combine all of these views and pick the best of them. This is the idea behind the International Charter Space and Major Disasters. Today, more countries from all around the world have chosen to commit their satellites to help provide the information to access the International Charter offers. An earthquake in Asia. One satellite has provided a high-resolution collapsed and where roads have been blocked by landslides. Rescue teams have up-to-date information in hours, helping them decide how to access the affected area and where they can do the most good. A volcanic eruption in Africa. Special satellites are configured to observe the lava, smoke and dust, and to deliver high-resolution maps of the affected communities. Experts can accurately assess whom to evacuate and where to establish a safe refugee camp. Flooding.